Let's toast to the ones we've replaced, the CEO joked, holding his glass high. I smiled, clinked my glass, and hit send on one email that would change everything. That's how it started. One toast, one email, one perfectly timed message that turned a celebration into a financial freeze worth $150 million. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. I'm Hazel, 34 years old, former senior risk manager at one of the biggest logistics firms on the East Coast. For 6 years, my life was a spreadsheet of forecasts, compliance charts, and red flag reports. I wasn't loud. I wasn't political. I just did my job, quietly and thoroughly. But at some point, being quietly good stopped being enough. It started a few months before that infamous toast. We had a new CEO, a man named Blake Carmichael, a finance guy with a jawline sharper than his sense of ethics. He loved buzzwords like efficiency, restructuring, and synergy. In reality, it meant layoffs. I saw the storm coming before most people did. My team's budget was frozen, audit reports were simplified, and meetings about compliance started getting shorter and shorter. In corporate language, that meant, we're taking risks and hoping no one notices. But I did, and that made me a problem. I remember the meeting that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine, reviewing the bank's liquidity conditions, our risk exposure, and insurance compliance. But Blake showed up with his new favorite person, Trent, a young guy from the finance department who had become his shadow, loud, arrogant, and convinced he was the future. Hazel, Blake said, I think your department's been overcomplicating things. We're moving fast now. We don't need these old-school checks slowing us down. I just smiled politely. You're saying we should skip risk verification on accounts over 10 million? Trent smirked. She loves her rules. No offense, Hazel, but this company used to run smoother before all this compliance crap. Before I could reply, Blake added, we're optimizing. You'll see. That day, I realized something. They weren't trimming fat. They were cutting the brakes. Over the next few weeks, they pushed me out of key meetings, reassigned my team members, and started treating me like a relic. Then, one Friday afternoon, HR sent me a proposal, a polite, corporate way of saying we'd like you to resign voluntarily. I read it twice. Then I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. See, my job wasn't just about checking boxes. I had authority over our financial compliance certification, the one document our partner banks required every quarter to keep our accounts active. Without it, every fund, every transaction, and every reserve tied to our main accounts could be frozen for regulatory review. And that certification? It expired in 48 hours. The only person authorized to renew it was me. That weekend, I worked quietly. I updated every audit file, completed all necessary forms, and drafted one final email, addressed to our lead bank contact, CC'd to our compliance lawyer, and timestamped with every regulation that had just expired. Then I saved it to my drafts folder. By Monday morning, the boardroom was full. They were celebrating the new phase of the company. Champagne glasses clinked, smiles flashed, and Blake raised his glass. Let's toast, he said, to the ones we've replaced and the ones who couldn't keep up. Everyone laughed. Even HR smiled nervously. I didn't. I just raised my glass, smiled slightly, and said, to new beginnings. As everyone sipped, I tapped send. The email went out. Time, 9:42 p.m. By the next morning, the bank froze $150 million across every corporate account. When I walked into the office, I could feel the shift. People were whispering, phones were ringing, and the CFO looked like she'd seen a ghost. By 10 a.m., there was an emergency meeting. The bank's lawyer was there, holding a printed copy of my email. The CEO's hands were trembling as he scanned it. His voice cracked when he asked the question that would haunt him for months. What time did you say you sent this? The air in that conference room was thick enough to choke on. Phones were buzzing, assistants were darting in and out, and the once cocky executives were now silent. The only sound was the faint tick-tick of the wall clock as the bank's attorney flipped through a binder of frozen account notices. I sat quietly in the corner, no longer dead weight, no longer invisible. Just watching. Blake's face had gone pale. There's no way this is real, he muttered, staring at the printout. We're in full compliance. We've got every authorization. The bank's lawyer, a woman named Ms. Aldridge, didn't even blink. According to this email, your compliance certification expired at midnight on the 3rd. That means all funds over $150 million are locked under Section 24A of the Financial Accountability Act. Trent, the new finance hotshot, fumbled for words. But Hazel, she didn't say anything. Ms. Aldridge turned her gaze to me. Ms. Green, you authored this notice? I nodded calmly. Yes. As per policy, I was required to inform the bank immediately when the company's certification lapsed. It's in the clause you approved last year. Blake's jaw clenched. You could have told us. I met his eyes, steady, quiet, but with all the words I'd been forced to swallow for months. I did, I said softly. 6 times. The emails were marked urgent. You had Trent reply for you. The silence that followed was absolute. The rest of that day unfolded like a movie in slow motion. The CFO was on the phone with the bank for hours. Payments were bouncing, suppliers were panicking, and the PR department was drafting internal issue statements to calm shareholders. And through it all, I stayed silent. Not out of fear, but because my work was already done. See, this wasn't about revenge for being pushed out. It was about accountability. When they replaced me with people who thought risk management meant ignoring regulations, they gambled with other people's money, employee pensions, supplier credits, client retainers. I just made sure the rules worked the way they were supposed to. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction. That evening, as I left the office, I saw Blake standing in the glass lobby, staring at the night skyline. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his arrogance had finally caught up. Hazel, he called out as I passed by. You could have warned me. I turned, calm as ever. I did warn you. You just didn't listen. He didn't have an answer for that. He just looked down at the floor, and I walked out into the cold February air. That night, I met up with my best friend, Lena, who worked in finance too. She listened, wide-eyed, as I told her everything, from the HR pressure to the final toast. You actually hit send during the toast? She asked, incredulous. Yeah, I said, sipping my coffee. He was laughing about replacing people. I figured it was the perfect moment. Lena laughed, shaking her head. You know you're terrifying when you're calm. Only when I need to be, I replied. By midweek, the news hit the financial press. Not the full story, of course, but headlines like, Major logistics firm faces temporary account freeze due to compliance oversight. Inside the company, panic ruled. Vendors demanded payments. The operations division had trucks grounded because fuel cards bounced, and even payroll was delayed. Then came the call. Hazel, it's the board. My phone buzzed. The voice was low and urgent. They need you back. Temporary consultant role. Just until this is fixed. I took a deep breath. They'd humiliated me, sidelined me, replaced me, and now they were asking for my help. Of course, I said smoothly, but it'll be on my terms. By Friday, I walked back into the same glass building, only this time, I didn't wear the nervous smile of an employee. I walked in with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth and her power. Blake looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was loose, and his voice was rough. Hazel, we just need your help to unfreeze this. You know the system better than anyone. I nodded. I'll need full access to compliance data and a direct line with the bank's legal counsel. He nodded immediately. Done. Whatever you need. Trent tried to interrupt, muttering something about internal processes, but I simply looked at him and said, maybe let the adults handle this part. The board chuckled nervously. For the first time, I saw it respect. Not pity, not dismissal, actual respect. That weekend, I reviewed everything. All the broken procedures, the false filings, the missing verifications. It was a mess. But underneath the chaos was something darker: unauthorized fund transfers. Millions moved between shell vendors, and all approved under Trent's department. The irony? The freeze I'd triggered to protect the company's financial integrity had just exposed something far worse than anyone expected. I wasn't just the risk manager anymore. I was the whistleblower. By Monday morning, I had everything I needed: access, authority, and most importantly, silence. No one dared question me now. The same men who had laughed at me weeks ago were suddenly waiting on my word before signing a document. But something wasn't sitting right. The data logs were strange. Funds that should have been tied to vendor contracts had been routed through shell companies. Not just one, 6. Each with slightly misspelled names of legitimate clients. The kind of detail you only notice when you've built the system yourself. I took screenshots, downloaded transaction trails, created encrypted backups. And then I sat back in my chair, staring at the number flashing across the screen. $42.6 million. That wasn't negligence. That was theft. I went straight to Blake's office. He looked up from his desk, visibly exhausted. "Hazel, please tell me you found a way to convince the bank to lift the freeze." "Not yet," I said evenly. "But I found something else." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I placed the report on his desk. "Those vendor payments, the ones that went through last quarter? They weren't real vendors. That's where your missing liquidity went." He skimmed the first page, then the second. His brow furrowed. "Who approved these?" I didn't say a word. I just turned the report around and pointed to the initials on the bottom of the authorization field.
TR.
"Trent," Blake muttered. "He told me all of that was cleared by compliance." I crossed my arms. Compliance didn't clear anything after January. You replaced the team before those files went through. His eyes darted up to mine. "You think he's stealing from us?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't think. I know." By the afternoon, the boardroom filled again. But this time, the atmosphere was heavier. No jokes. No toasts. Just fear. Trent tried to spin it, of course. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. Those were vendor consolidations. We've been restructuring payment channels." Ms. Aldridge, the bank's attorney, cut him off. "Mr. Reynolds, one of those vendors is registered to your brother-in-law's address in Miami." The room went silent. Blake turned crimson. "Is this true?" Trent's voice cracked. "It's not what it looks like." Blake slammed his palm on the table. "Then tell us what it is, Trent. Because right now it looks like embezzlement." Trent's mouth opened, then closed again. He had no defense. That was the moment everything changed. Blake turned to me, the same man who once mocked my caution emails, and said, "Hazel, what's your recommendation?" It was surreal. All eyes on me. The woman they once sidelined was now steering the crisis. "Freeze all outgoing transfers," I said. "Notify the SEC, cooperate with the bank's investigation, and remove any staff involved in payment processing until we're cleared." Blake nodded immediately. "Done." Ms. Aldridge added, "If you follow those steps, we can begin reinstating access to the main corporate accounts within 72 hours. Relief washed through the room. Not joy, not triumph, just exhausted gratitude. But for me, the real battle was just starting. That night, I received an email. No subject line. Just a single sentence. "You don't know who you're dealing with."
No signature.
No address trace. But I knew who it was. Trent. I'd seen enough of his ego to recognize his threats. I saved the email to my encrypted drive. If he thought intimidation would work, he had no idea who he was playing with. The next day, while combing through another set of financial logs, I found something else. A deleted backup. Hidden under a misnamed folder, time-stamped 10 minutes before the company's server audit last quarter. It contained payment authorizations, but this time with signatures. Forged ones. Mine included. That's when my stomach dropped. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd used my credentials to approve the transfers. If the board hadn't called me back, I'd be the one under investigation. My name, My career, my reputation, all would have been gone. I called Lena that night, voice trembling for the first time in weeks. He forged my approval, Lena. My actual signature. She was silent for a moment. Hazel, he wanted you gone. This was never just about the promotion. He was setting you up. I swallowed hard. I know. But now I have proof. And I'm not letting him walk away clean. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The glass lobby felt colder than usual. When I reached my desk, I saw Trent packing his things into a box. 2 security guards stood nearby. Blake was there too, arms folded. He looked at me as I approached. Hazel, the board decided to terminate Trent pending investigation. We'll need your help documenting the evidence. I nodded, expression neutral. Already done. Trent glared at me, his voice low and venomous. You think this makes you the hero? You just killed the company's reputation. I met his eyes, steady, calm.
No, Trent.
You did that when you forgot integrity had a price tag.
He looked away.
Security escorted him out. By the end of the week, the accounts were partially reinstated. The company survived, barely. But something had shifted forever. Blake called me into his office one last time. He looked older, tired, humbled. Hazel, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I should have listened. You saved us, even after what we did to you. I gave a small smile. You didn't need saving, Blake. You needed accountability. He nodded slowly. The board wants you to take Trent's position. Permanently. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of everything lift. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace. When Trent was escorted out, the office felt lighter, but not cleaner. Something about Blake's apology didn't sit right with me. He seemed too calm, too rehearsed. And there was a flicker in his eyes, the kind of flicker you only notice when someone knows more than they're admitting. I told myself to let it go. The system was being cleaned, the accounts were secured, and justice had been served. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. But 2 days later, as I was finalizing a report for the bank, I came across a file buried deep within the internal audit logs. It was labeled, Private, Executive Access Only. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a memo, dated 6 weeks before my firing, addressed to Blake himself. Subject line, Temporary Account Diversion Authorization. The document explicitly approved the same shell accounts I'd flagged, signed by none other than Blake C. Harrison. My hands started to tremble. All this time, I'd believed Trent was the mastermind. But now it was clear.
He was just the fall guy.
I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Every decision Blake had made now made sense. The rushed firings, the compliance cuts, my sudden dismissal. He'd been using Trent to move money quietly through approved vendor contracts. And the moment I'd raised questions, I'd become a liability. Trent's arrogance had simply made him the perfect scapegoat. That evening, I stayed late at the office, the only light on in a sea of darkness. I printed the document, placed it in an envelope, and slid it into my purse. Then I opened my email and began writing one last message. Not to Blake, not to the bank, but to the federal auditor I'd met during the government freeze 3 weeks ago, a man named Ethan Moore, who told me, if you ever find something bigger than bad math, call me directly. I attached the files, everything I had, the authorization memo, the fake vendor logs, even Trent's forged approvals. I hesitated for a second, hovering over send. Then I hit it, and for the first time in months, I leaned back and exhaled. The next morning, the building buzzed like a beehive. Rumors swirled. People whispered in hallways. By noon, everyone knew something was wrong again. Then the email came through. Subject, Emergency Board Meeting at 1 p.m. Mandatory attendance. I walked into the conference room to find Blake already there, pacing. The color had drained from his face. When the external counsel joined via video call, the room fell silent. Mr. Harrison, the lawyer began, we received documents from federal auditors this morning. They've requested your immediate cooperation regarding unauthorized asset transfers. Blake froze. Unauthorized? That's ridiculous. We just cleared this. The lawyer glanced at me, just for a second, then back at him. The documents came from within the company, Mr. Harrison. They include an authorization memo signed by you.
His jaw tightened.
That's impossible. Someone forged that. The lawyer didn't flinch. They traced the digital signature to your executive account. He turned to me, fury flashing in his eyes. You did this. I held his gaze.
Calm. Steady.
You did this, Blake. I just made sure the right people saw it. He looked like he wanted to explode, but the room was full of witnesses. Board members, legal counsel, HR, the very people who once laughed when I warned them about risk exposure. And now, they were all watching him fall apart. Blake tried one last desperate move.
He pointed at me.
She's bitter. I fired her. She's been out for revenge since day one. But before he could continue, Lena, sitting at the far end of the table, spoke up. With respect, Blake, Hazel didn't leak anything until after the first investigation. You're the one who approved those accounts. We've all seen the timestamps. Her voice didn't shake. Neither did mine. He looked around, realizing there was nowhere left to run. The lawyer stood. Mr. Harrison, you're officially suspended pending investigation. Please surrender your ID and company phone immediately. It was poetic. The same line Trent had used on me weeks earlier. Turn in your badge. Blake's face was a mask of disbelief. This company doesn't exist without me, he hissed. I looked him squarely in the eyes.
No, Blake.
It doesn't exist because of you. After security escorted him out, the room stayed silent for a long moment. The kind of silence that follows a storm. Finally, Lena turned to me. You know, you could have walked away.
Why didn't you?
I smiled faintly. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. She nodded slowly. You realize what you've done, right? You didn't just save the company. You saved everyone's jobs. I shrugged lightly. Let's just say, I was tired of watching people toast to other people's losses. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened my email again. There was a new message from Ethan Moore, the federal auditor. Hazel, the documents you sent confirmed our suspicions. Formal charges are being prepared. You did the right thing.
Yem.
I read it twice, then closed my laptop. The city lights outside shimmered against the glass, cold, bright, endless. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The morning after Blake's removal, the office felt eerily quiet.
No fakes mails, no hollow jokes.
Just the sound of keyboards and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. It was strange. The same building that once felt like a battlefield now felt like a blank page. As I walked through the corridors, people nodded at me. Not out of fear or obligation, but respect. Real, quiet respect. I stopped by the break room and noticed something taped to the bulletin board, a photo from the night of the infamous toast. Everyone's glasses raised, laughter frozen mid-frame. Underneath, someone had scribbled in pen, "Next time, toast to integrity." I smiled. Whoever wrote that got it. By mid-morning, I was in the boardroom again, but this time, it wasn't an emergency meeting.
It was a planning session. Lena led it, sitting beside me.
We'll need to restructure the compliance department, she said. And Hazel, the board voted, you're officially head of risk management.
Permanent.
For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd fought so long for this, endured humiliation, betrayal, and loss, and now that it was finally here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance. I nodded slowly. Then let's make sure we never repeat the same mistakes. Everyone agreed. We spent the next few hours outlining a new transparency policy, mandatory audits, and direct whistleblower lines. For the first time, I wasn't fighting the system. I was the system. That afternoon, as I cleared old emails from my inbox, one subject line caught my eye. Toast night. I opened it. It was from an anonymous sender. You really think this changes anything? The people at the top always win. No signature.
No threat this time.
Just cynicism. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. Not always. Sometimes the quiet ones win too. Then I hit send and archived it. Because that was the truth. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't fought dirty, I hadn't burned bridges. I'd simply done my job, the job they said didn't matter, and in doing so, turned their arrogance against them. A week later, I was invited to a conference in DC on corporate ethics. The irony didn't escape me. The keynote speaker was none other than Ethan Moore, the federal auditor who'd helped me bring Blake's scheme down. After his talk, he spotted me in the audience and smiled. When the session ended, he came over. "You know," he said, "I've seen hundreds of corporate fraud cases. Most people look the other way, even when they know what's happening. You didn't." I shrugged lightly. "I just sent an email." He laughed. "Yeah, well, that email froze $150 million and exposed 2 executives. That's one hell of a click." I smiled. "Guess timing really is everything." He nodded. "You ever think about joining Federal Risk? We could use someone like you." I hesitated. "Maybe one day. Right now, I think my company still needs me." He extended his hand. "Fair enough. Just promise me one thing. Never stop sending those emails." I shook his hand and smiled.
Deal.
Back home that night, I stood on my balcony, overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, tall, bright, alive. It reminded me of that night of the toast, the laughter, the arrogance. How quickly power had shifted. How easily everything they'd built could crumble under the weight of their own ego. I thought about Blake, the man who believed he could outsmart everyone, and Trent, who thought loyalty to corruption was smarter than integrity. In the end, both of them underestimated the one thing they couldn't control. Someone who simply refused to play their game. The next morning, I walked into the office early, coffee in hand, ready for another day. On my desk sat a small card with no name on it. Inside, one handwritten line. "Thank you for saving us, the team." For a moment, my throat tightened. I wasn't used to gratitude. I'd spent so long being dismissed that I forgot what appreciation even looked like. But that note, that quiet, humble note, meant more than any promotion or bonus ever could. Later that afternoon, as we wrapped up a strategy meeting, Lena turned to me. "You ever regret sending that email?" I smiled. "Every once in a while. Then I remember what would have happened if I didn't." She chuckled softly. "I'll drink to that." I raised my coffee cup. No toast this time. We both laughed. That night, before shutting down my laptop, I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "The toast that froze $150 million. Notes on integrity." Maybe someday, I'd write it all down. Not for fame. Not for revenge. But so people would understand that one simple truth. You don't need power to change everything. You just need courage and the timing to hit send when it matters most. The world outside glittered with city lights, and for once, the glow didn't feel cold. It felt earned. As I closed my laptop and took one last look out the window, I whispered to myself, "Here's to the quiet ones. The ones who don't toast, they act." And with that, I turned off the light.